Pozdravljeni, hello. Welcome to yet another presentation in the History and the Edge series. I am Janja Sedlaček, and I'm really glad to present you Jelena Tešija. She's a PhD candidate at the Central European University in Vienna, and also a research affiliate, former doctoral researcher in the ERC Advanced Grant Research Project ZARA. And she has chosen our institute as a host organization, so if you want to chat with her some more, find her for a coffee, you know where to find her. So her PhD dissertation focuses on the history of International Cooperative Women's Guild and the contributions of the Central and Eastern European members to this organization activism. So Jelena, today I'm really glad that you will present us another piece in the puzzle in the 1950s and the beginning of the 1960s about women activism, women movement, about collectives, agricultural history, and also maybe mostly foreign affairs, right? Yep. Okay, so the mic is yours, Jelena.
Thank you, Janja. Hi, everyone. So I'm glad that you actually mentioned what my dissertation is about so that I can skip that part, because I think I will struggle with time. So stay with me, because I have to explain a couple of unknown organizations and many other things. So basically this, as you could see here, I'm a part of the ZARA project, and we collectively work on the history of women's labor activism in Eastern Europe throughout the 20th century. And my dissertation is one component study of this bigger project. So this lecture will be about socialist Yugoslavia in this international organization and a bit beyond during the 1950s, when Yugoslavia joined the International Guild. To sum it up, I follow, and I will explain it further a bit more, these inclusive perspectives of labor activism in and out of the state, and considering the specific international position of Yugoslavia after Tito-Stalin split, I demonstrate that exactly Yugoslav cooperative organization on the federal level was one of the most important forms of Yugoslav women's international organizing during this specific period and before official beginning of the non-alignment movement. I also show how the cooperative women activists, including people such as Mara Rupena Osolnik, Milka Kufrin, and Vilma Pirkovič, valued this international organization as a unique platform for the promotion of their cooperative system, but mostly for the exchange of knowledge and experience on specific women's issues and building of crucial international networks. So, it doesn't work. Help. It's not, yeah. Maybe. Well. Touch of technology.
No, it's moving on your computer, but not.
Yeah, no, it's not here. That's the problem. We didn't manage to match them.
It changed earlier when you were doing something, so maybe something.
This is even worse than Zoom problems, I must say. Amazing.
But we have Robert.
Wait. Where is the?
No pressure.
Okay, now it moves.
Yes, but
what do I have
where
to
is
do?
the pointer? I can't see the pointer.
It travels.
Oh, okay. when you click here.
Uh-huh. It has to be here, huh? Can I? But yeah, it's okay. It moves.
Moves?
It moved now. Look, it's now.
Okay.
Okay, but
If we would be on TV now, I would have to speak something, talk about something, but we're not.
or I can be extremely unhappy with very unhappy facial expressions. What to do?
Okay. Okay, it moves.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Do we know why it moves?
No.
Cool. Okay. So, the outline of this presentation, let's pretend that it just begins. I will briefly try to be brief on sources and my main theoretical frameworks, including the specific approach on women's labor activism. Then I will switch to International Cooperative Women's Guild as an organization and try to explain things about it. And then we will move to Yugoslav Cooperative Women's Section and its international connections, mainly through the International Guild. Cool. Here, and you don't see the things below, maybe very good, but I apologize. Okay. It's okay. Never mind. When we talk about primary sources, I mean, often when you finish this kind of presentation, people ask you what are your sources, so I decided to introduce them in advance. Basically, I work with several archives and collections within these archives. The main one is in Hull History Centre in UK, which is the main collections and the richest one on this International Cooperative Women's Guild organization. And then I combine this material with the material from the archives of Yugoslavia, so the federal level, also Croatian state archives, the republic level, and a smaller unit of archives of the Cooperative Union of Slovenia, documents that are shared kindly with me by Janja. When it comes to the sources, when I first started to work with many of them, it was a bit of a nightmare. However, also I was excited to figure out that this multi-scale approach to international organization can sometimes be very useful to get a picture about international level from the national and local archives. For example, this Hull History Centre archive simply does not contain files on the congresses after, for example, 1951. And it is precisely because of my interest in the Yugoslav branch that I found documents in Ljubljana, Zagreb, and Belgrade that helped me to understand what was going on in that period. And of course, that every time you do a research on international organization, that working with national archives helps you to get another perspective and stuff. It's very logical. But when it comes to these archivally not very well documented organizations and also scarcely researched documentation, I think it's not only about getting a new perspective on international happenings, but it's about getting a crucial missing puzzles. And this is why I was very happy to find some things in these archives. My second sources are actually published sources, including the reports of the main international cooperative organization, which is called International Cooperative Alliance. Then all of the magazines from Yugoslav mass women's organizations, Žena danas from the federal level, Naša žena, Yugoslav, Slovenian Republic level, and also Zadrugarka, which means Cooperative Women, which was a specialized magazine of the women's section, Cooperative Women's section in Croatia. When it comes to women's labor activism, here I actually apply an approach that we as a Zara team advocated in the introduction to edited volume that was published officially, 2024. And Basically, I apply in my dissertation long-term approach. I cover period from 1920s to 1960s, together with the trans-regional, which includes also cross-regional. It's now about terminology, but I use mostly transnational, which includes both formal and informal connections and transnational exchanges. Combined together, a long-term and trans-regional can help us to understand better both connections and all the changes in a long-term perspective, and from different parts of in this case, it was about Central and Eastern Europe, but basically it can apply to any region. I focus more here on to integrative or inclusive part of this approach, and together combined with the critical. When I say integrative and inclusive, I mean that the activism and how we define activism includes many different forms of organizing, so including parties, trade unions, cooperatives, many non-formal organizations, or completely I don't know, community-based organizations. That includes also varieties of agendas. So not only agendas related to workplace or agendas such as equal pay or other things related to workplace, but also things such as unpaid reproductive work, and this is where including housework and care work, which is one of the topics of in my dissertation, but also this presentation. And it also includes activism that happens at first many scales, but also in many contexts. Here I want to actually emphasize this, because when we think of labor activism, we can think of like completely bottom-up perspectives, but basically it can also include many women's functionaries and activists within the women-friendly states or in state socialist organizations. And this is where actually my topic fits. And then it comes with the critical part, of course, because whenever you are approaching your sources, and then of course including the state socialist or self-management socialist sources, the idea is to approach them critically and carefully. And I think this is a bit of obvious thing, but I find it that it's important to also explain. But it's about a kind of going beyond celebratory tendencies in women's labor activism and applying a more critical lenses. And now, cooperative movement. What is that? So basically, cooperatives and the cooperative movement are considered in labor historiography as the third pillar of the international or of the labor movement. Together with first being political parties and second being trade unions. When it comes to the local levels, cooperatives are both business organizations that are owned and controlled by their own members, but also social movement organizations that always went a bit more beyond economic issues and also including economic issues. There are a couple of classifications of cooperatives, but maybe the basic one would be the consumer, producer, credit, and worker cooperatives. These cooperatives were connected to many different ideologies, including social democrats, communists, nationalists, and developed in many different contexts, urban areas, rural areas, different kind of states. With the basic thing, for example, be that consumer cooperatives were mostly developed in urban areas and credit and producers in rural areas. And now we come to the International Cooperative Women's Guild, which was an international organization that was unofficially established in 1921 and then officially in 1924. And that was dissolved officially in 1966, but already from 1963 we notice just fading out all the activities, and organization was basically after 1963 not active anymore. It was a women-only international cooperative organization that claimed to represent working-class mothers and housewives. It was formed on the initiative of the women from Austria and England. And from the very beginning, it was in touch, and then after that, it accepted into membership also the Soviet Union. However, in general, and it stayed like this from the beginning until the end, although different kind of cooperative women were present there, the focus was on the consumer cooperatives and women from the consumer cooperative movement. And the reason was that because of the gender division of labor, consumer cooperative movement was very important for women's activism, because they were considered those one in the families who were managing the budget and those one who were going to the shops. And basically in consumer cooperative movement, you have a shop that is owned and controlled by the consumers, and cooperative activists in consumer movement always wanted to attract more women because of their purchasing power, how they say, and they were often called women with the basket, which will be important later in the presentation. The main agendas of this organization were throughout its existence: peace, reproductive labor, meaning housework, different kind of care work, mental and emotional labor. Then women's position in the cooperative movement as such, because they were fighting for more women in decision making and management positions, and some parts of the women's civil and political rights on which they collaborated with other organizations. And then one thing I find very intriguing about the organization and what makes it really unique in international labor organizing was this fact that together with the main organization, which was International Cooperative Alliance, and this was independent organization but attached to it, basically it turned out that that the International Cooperative Movement was the only branch of the labor movement in which social democrats and communists worked together throughout the entire time. And these times were times of quite strict division between social democrats and communists. They did not work in the same organization. The the movement was quite split. Here's the photo of the conference of the International Cooperative Women's Guild in 1927. I don't have many photos of these women, so I'm always happy when I find something and can share. And now we go to the bit of explanation of the Communist Social Democrats collaboration, which I find important later on for Yugoslavia too. Here's the quote from Emmy Freundlich. She's, with no doubts, maybe the most important international cooperative women activist of that period. She was a long-term president of the International Guild from 1921 until she died in 1948, and there are some assessment that after her death, the organization was never the same, because she was quite a strong link between the women organization and the men-dominated main organization. So here she is. She was also active in other parts of social democratic movements. So when she was at the meeting at the 4th International Women's Conference of the Labor and Socialist International, she was actually referring to the fact that International Guild had communists there. As from how she phrased it, you can see she was not happy with it. So she said, "You must not forget that the communists are also represented in our international, that we cannot carry through anything at all of what we want to do in conjunction with the socialist women, unless we also interest the communist women in this work. And this was not so also straightforward when it comes how social democrats perceived communists in their organization. This entire relationship was full of tensions and frictions, but also of collaborations. They managed to work together. They managed to come up with certain documents. They managed to come up with certain policies and ideas of what to do or what not to do. As I will show later, it was easier on some topics and not so easy on other topics. But when I started to work on this, I was wondering, like, why actually, what was the main reason for social democrats to have these communist women in their organization? And reasons were multiple. First of all, political reasons. Cooperative movement didn't want to, actually wanted to avoid the split that happened in other parts of the labor movement. But moreover, these women were actually interested in how cooperative system was developed in post-capitalist society. They thought that having the Soviet Union from the very beginning with them, as Emmy Freundlich wrote here, provide opportunities for the international women's cooperative movement to explore and develop fresh territory. And they see Soviet Union as an organization that would be able to contribute much of the value to the sum of international cooperative activities. Here are the three main publication or documents that were adopted in interwar period by the International Cooperative Women's Guild on the specific topic I'm interested at, which is reproductive labor. In the interwar period, they started to discuss, so from the very beginning, this organization was, because they claimed that they represent housewives, it was always ambiguous whether they mean housewives that are employed or those who are stay at home, and they were mixing these terms. However, already in 1927, they published one of my favorite publication here, which is The Family Wash, which was an international study on practices of doing laundry. So they sent many questionnaires to their national branches, and this was part of how they worked. They basically were mostly focused on education and knowledge production in terms of data collection and then summaries, and then creating policies or recommendation on the basis of these questionnaires. In Family Wash, I recommend to go through it. It's a short booklet and it's now available in our Zara database, and you can take a look. They sum up all the different ways of doing laundry and all the phases of doing laundry, washing, boiling, ironing, and all the ways in which in different countries these things were being done. Finally, they came up with some recommendations on more labor-saving devices, on more wash houses, and of course, a bit of cautiously framed socialization of reproductive labor. Later on, they moved to another topics. Mothers of the Future would be a topic, I think I have to hurry up, yep, of discussing women's care work, like what to do. Should we give women family allowances so that they don't have to work when they have small children, or should we, as for example the Soviet Union advocated for, work more on socialization of all the care work facilities so that women can go to work? Finally, they came up with something that is unique for this period, which is called Housewives Program. It's a program of 12 points discussing housewives' role in the community and all the things that have to be done so that the housewife work is actually respected in the community, including many things on many topics. Later on, during the Second World War, the organization didn't disappear, but of course that activities were limited, and mostly They were in touch with each other. They tried to help to each other to a degree, but only later on they continue with the congresses from 1946 on. And here we see a couple of more documents from the post-war period in which they tackled the issue of reproductive labor. So they talked about economic independence of the housewife. They talk about service cooperatives as a factor in alleviating the task of housewives and the role of cooperatives in organizing services to help women in running their homes. And now, 25 minutes later, we move to Yugoslavia and the International Guild. Before the international level, I will just briefly tell you more about the sections, the cooperative women sections. So these sections that are called sekcija žena zadrugarki, or in Slovenia they had a specific term that was not section but zveza, zadružnic. These were auxiliary bodies within the Yugoslav cooperative system on federal, republic, and local levels. They were established in 1951, but it's a debatable issue because the federal level was established in 1951, the end of 1951, and the rest were not particularly active so far from what I see from my sources that are now going through for another chapter of my dissertation. Basically, in 1951, in 1952, federal and republic level organizations of these sections were the most important one. So what was their idea? The idea of all of these sections was to focus on attracting peasant women in cooperatives, educating them in agriculture and home economics, advocating for the socialization of reproductive labor. In all of this, they collaborated closely with other women's organizations in Yugoslavia. To that degree, when you actually first look into the documents, you can be very confused of what kind of organizations these organizations were. So with the AFEŽ, with the Savez ženskih društava, Union of Women Societies, sorry. And here I decided not to go into explanation of the Yugoslav cooperative system that went through many changes in the 1950s, starting from the period of collectivization until 1951 or 1953, and then on many other ideas on like what to do with these women's sections, what kind of organizations are they within the cooperative system, and so on and so on. But basically, what did these women do internationally? This was my question. As you can see, for one of the quote, they saw the International Guild as a body that mainly serves for the exchange of the experience between national organizations that actually happen through congresses, 3 yearly reports, mutual visits, and the organization of seminars of specific topics, women and education, women's position in the cooperative movement, and so on and so on. And these are all the ways in which Yugoslav women participated in this work. They went to the congresses, they participated with their reports to the 3 yearly reports. They visited, and this is what they fought for also, to go to visit other organizations that were members of the International Guild. Of course, every 2 years, or it was sometimes 1 year, they would go to Central Committee meetings. They participated in different kind of essays that were submitted and discussed in the congresses. Yugoslavia also wrote its own essay on role of cooperatives in the changing world. And of course, on all of this data collection and knowledge production on women in the cooperative movement. So here are the presidents of the Federal Women's Cooperative Section. The first one was Mara Rupena Osolnik, well-known Slovene political worker. The second one was Milka Kufrin Mara was the president of the Federal Section from 1951 to 1954, then comes Milka Kufrin from 1954 to 1958, and then Mara Rupena Osolnik was back in the early 60s. And Vilma Pirkovič is here because at one point she replaced Milka Kufrin at one of the central committee meetings of the International Cooperative Women's Guild. Many other women were part of delegations that were going to the congresses. So, for example, there was Jelena Tešija, also Bosa Cvetić, who was a president of the mass women organization ICWG. But these women I consider, together with Ljubica Uzelac, as internationally most active and most important ones when it comes to International Cooperative Women's Guild. So how did they perceive the International Cooperative Women's Guild? I think that this perception was not so straightforward, but I think I found that they looked at it through two things. They basically valued the organization of the International Cooperative Women's Guild for going beyond Cold War divisions. So there were always communists and social democrats and Western organizations and Eastern Bloc organizations, but also through the perspective of going beyond producer-consumer cooperatives. I mean, even not only historically, but also historiographically, which is maybe, it's connected for sure. When it comes to cooperative history, for example, consumer cooperatives are rarely studied together with producer cooperatives, and all of these things to bring together under the same analytical framework is already a challenge in itself, and I think many people avoid doing that. I find it useful, especially when it comes to looking to the international organizations that were doing that. They were from the beginning mix of different kind of cooperatives. And I think one of the legit questions for historians of cooperatives would be like, how did our historical actors make sense of working together and not having sometimes even the same interests and so on. As here we can see, one of the information bulletins of the Mass Women organization, and you would see that most of the quotes that I chose here are coming not from the cooperative women's sections materials, but from the Savez ženskih društava or Union of Women's Societies materials. This is because I actually emphasize this to prove my point later on. In all of these international bulletins that were focusing on what has been done previously internationally and what is planned for the next year, most important activities were always connected to international cooperative movement. So among all the activities that women did, these one would take first pages or be the longest one. And this is because, now we get a step back, when it comes to overcoming bloc divisions or Cold War divisions. So after 1948, I mean, in 1949, Yugoslavia, ICWG, the main organization, women's organization in Yugoslavia, was expelled from the communist-aligned International Federation, Women International Democratic Federation, WIDF. From there on, they never rejoined this organization. They would come to their congresses, they would visit each other, but they never rejoined the organization. And this period of early Cold War and early post-Tito Stalin split, women's organizations in Yugoslavia didn't have many options. And this is where the cooperative movement as such played a huge role. Some of the comrades of these women claimed in one of the discussions, because they were constantly discussing their own position, like should they exist, should they not exist, everything, crazy 50s. one of the comrades in one of the discussions said to Milka Kufrin, the president of the section, that the entire business with women's section was because they wanted to enter international movement in 1951, and this is why the whole system was created. So this whole conversation speaks to a very like the inherently international character of this organization, but I think it was quite low to claim that these women and these sections were there just for the sake of Yugoslavia's international politics, although it was, of course, also because of that. And then, of course, this organization was perfect for them to be able to do something international in the context in which they could not work with the rest of the Eastern Bloc as they did previously. However, we come now like to the producer-consumer division. They were all the time Yugoslav women emphasizing, yes, many of these women there are coming from the capitalist systems. They are part of these consumer cooperatives. But we think we are not fair if we completely sideline them and make them irrelevant, because basically we can learn from them and they can learn from us. We can actually also influence them. And they highly valued all the knowledge and experience exchange they had with women in the International Cooperative Women's Guild. And this is how, when they were arguing with their own comrades in the cooperatives, this is how they wanted to defend their existence and their membership in the International Guild. They would say, this is extremely important because this is the only organization in which, as you can see, participate both Eastern and Western countries, and which will very soon expand with new members from Asia and Africa. This is what they hoped for, but it never really happened. And the first one, I put here the quote from the same report, because it shows that they were not critical toward these women's organizations. They, of course, were communists who thought that sometimes consumer cooperatives in Western countries are completely hopeless, and you would not change anything within these systems. Still, they really thought there is something in being in touch with these women and learning about some strategies for certain specific women's issues for them. The second part of this story is, how did these women communicate everything about this with their comrades in the, for example, Central Cooperative Union here? And this is where Milka Kufrin, and this is where my title comes from, said, therefore, so she was praising the International Cooperative Consumer Organization, saying, it cannot be thought that members of these organizations only know how to carry baskets to the market. We could cooperate with them on a number of specific issues, exchange experiences, and by God, influence them. And they basically, throughout the 50s, fought for material resources, the women from the cooperative women sections. The first Congress that they attended in 1952, they got only like expenses for 2 women. Then they, for the 1954 Congress, they managed to send a delegation of 4 women, maybe 5th one, but I could not be sure if she in the end went with them or not. And this was a direct consequence of their fight for this with the comrades within the Central Cooperative Union, when they decided that not only federal cooperative union would finance this, but also republic levels. Milka also had an idea that women's organizations should fund this, but then Vida Tomšić was very harsh on this, and she was like, no way, cooperatives have more money than anybody else. And basically, yeah, it was always about trying to figure out how to have some money for going to the congresses, also to have all of these visits and so on. And then just finally, I think only 5 minutes, as I said earlier, International Cooperative Women's Guild was also a place of meetings, and this is where Yugoslavia was in touch with many other cooperative organizations, national ones. From the sources, I could see that they were in a close relationship mostly with English cooperatives, but also then with Belgium, with Italy, and in the end they also collaborated with some national branches from the Eastern Bloc. However, here, for the purpose of this presentation, I just focus briefly on England. As you could see, this is a meeting that happened in Belgrade in 1961 that I didn't mention earlier, but International Guild Central Committee had its meeting in Belgrade. This was a rare occasion on which anything related to International Guild happened in Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia. Another occasion was a Congress in Prague in 1946. But basically, this meeting in Belgrade also was among the last ones of the International Guild, but almost all the International Guild participants from national branches were there, and this is just a break for refreshment during the meeting. My favorite person is this one who is very cold there in the corner. Never mind. She's Carla Paulsen from Denmark. Yeah. Still cold.
Wait, what month was this in?
October. Yeah.
Looks like February, yeah?
So basically, why is this here connected to England is this because it on the photo you can see the General Secretary of English Cooperative Women's Guild, or English Women's Cooperative Guild, which was Mabel Rydell. So the Women's Cooperative Guild from England is the most famous one, most well-researched one, and also with a long history and tradition. Here we see the General Secretary of that time, who was, according to sources, a very close friend of Yugoslavia. She visited Yugoslavia several times, which is also in line with what was happening in the early post-war period with the British consumer cooperative movements. From earlier times, they were both also social democrats and communists as a part of this cooperative movement. And the Women's Cooperative Guild was always considered a bit more radical one and with more communists in it. And in early, for example, in 1946, British cooperatives visited many countries in Eastern Europe, including Yugoslavia. But from already 1947, the strong anti-communist faction actually sidelined all of the communists within the movement, so these connections were not so frequent. However, from my sources, this did not disrupt connections of the Women's Cooperative Guild with Yugoslav cooperative women. They kept coming. They were visiting Yugoslavia during the 1950s. Yugoslav delegation traveled to England in 1957, and then we had a big also delegation of English women in 1956, and then later also in 1958, and they were actually collaborating closely to a degree that this General Secretary, Mabel Rydell, during this meeting in Belgrade in 1961, she claimed that some organizations and delegates from other Western organizations during the previous Congress didn't communicate with English cooperative women because they accused them of being communists. And then she denied any inclination to communism. It's in the minutes of meetings of the Belgrade meeting. I find it is a very good glimpse into how complicated all of these relationships were there actually. And if you ask me, Mabel was a communist. I mean, but okay, her choice. This is a delegation of Women's Cooperative Guild women from England to Yugoslavia in 1958. This visit was to Slovenia, Croatia, and Serbia. You can see that Vilma Pirkovič is third from the left, and the rest are women from England. And the last one here, I think it's Milka Kufrin, but I could not confirm that this was her. I think, okay, to sum it up, in 1951, Socialist Yugoslavia joined the International Guild. And my presentation explores Yugoslavia relationship with it, following inclusive perspectives on labor activism in and out of state, and considering its international specific position in the Cold War period. I demonstrate how this section turned out to be one of the most important organizational forms of Yugoslav women's international organizing, and how they saw it as a unique platform for the promotion of their cooperative system, exchange of knowledge on specific women's issues, and building of crucial international networks. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jelena. You can take a rest before all the engaged questions hit you. So, the floor is open for the questions. Okay, if not, I can start. Yeah, you have one? Yeah.
Well, I have one. Well, Jelena about the Institute of Philosophy, Prague. I'm currently visiting. So, thanks a lot for this marvelous presentation. What I would be interested in is the, let's say, relationship of the International Women's Organization. Sorry for not repeating the right title. And it's like different national section to, let's say, the political state of affairs in their own country. So I can imagine, for example, that the English delegation would be complaining about the state of capitalism in England, right? Mm-hmm. And my question would be, like, to what extent the Yugoslav section would be criticizing at the international level or at the national national levels in Yugoslavia, the, let's say, process of building socialism as well as the actual existing socialism then in the late of the 1950s, if you can see this kind of like critical voices towards socialism.
Yeah, thanks. What I saw so far from the sources is they were not critical internationally of the system. They were, of course, more critical nationally in terms of their meetings and then discussing all of the problems. They were quite vocal about that and kind of big fans of self-critique. But when it comes to international movement, I think that from what's written there, the reports and all of this that I can see, they were quite cautious when it comes to criticizing Yugoslavia as such, especially in early 50s when...
Yeah, this was still 1950s.
Yeah. So this was not the case. However, I wonder actually about, all of these delegation visits and stuff, what was going on there in person and what we cannot know. But from the sources, no, the critique was not there.
And this wouldn't change like when it comes to the late 50s and early 60s?
You can see that they, how to put it? It's my feeling that they were more critical, but I cannot point out in all of the sources like what would be the. I think they were more into explaining how it works, and you could see from their international reports how sometimes they were confused with how things are functioning in Yugoslavia, and these confusions were quite often because things were changing every 2 months and they had to figure out everything. So basically when they would talk about these service cooperatives, they went in length explaining that at that specific time, this was not in charge of women's sections, it was in charge of commune, and then all of that. You could see that maybe a hint of criticism, but this would be maybe a stretched interpretation of it. Thank you.
Okay, next question. Yeah,
Isidora.
Thank you. I'll ask you something a bit broader, but you can say whatever would make sense in terms of what research you have done so far. But I'm thinking more in what you were saying before, that it's a long-term and trans-regional perspective. So could you say a bit more of how this relates to the earlier period in Yugoslavia, in the 20s and 30s? Or do you then just focus on international organization from the 20s? And then also, where are you at with like understanding this broader regional context? Because I like looking at these, for instance, booklets. We saw the Austrian name, but also the Czech names, and like where there's some Yugoslav-Czech relations, for instance, that were relevant for understanding the story. Because I know that in the interwar period, these were quite important, especially when it comes to the housework issues and things like that.
When it comes to Yugoslavia and then long-term period, I failed to mention here due to time restraint that International Cooperative Women's Guild was in touch with some cooperative women's organizations in Yugoslavia in interwar period, but these were not many. And the most prominent one was actually the Slovene one, Zveza delavskih žen in deklet. That was close to becoming a member, but then it never happened. It's unclear from the sources why, but it anyway stopped. It was dissolved in 1930s. And then they were in touch with some Serbian agricultural women clubs, but these clubs were very not well established and didn't last long. And this is what I could find about international relations. My sources from the interwar period for Yugoslavia and women are not many. I spent quite a lot of time basically searching for women in sources, but with a limited success. And then when it comes to this post-war period, I think I will simply, on the example of Yugoslavia, say that the political rupture was real. In terms of really not, I could not follow traces of these women being connected to cooperative movement of the interwar period. However, you could trace their professional interest in agriculture, for example. All of these women many of them were revolutionary activists in the interwar and during the war. And then after that, basically, they contributed with their real expertise to the building of self-management socialist Yugoslavia. Then the rest, I focus. You could see in the interwar period that many of these booklets, so for example, Polish branch was strong, Czechoslovakian branch was strong from the very beginning, and basically Czechoslovakia had a very vibrant consumer cooperative movement in interwar period as such, with a lot of clash between social democrats and communists. But later on, Yugoslavia had friendlier relationships with so-called Western countries, but in second half of the 50s, they also collaborated with Polish cooperatives. There is one, and I didn't mention it here, they organized a Slavic seminar or something like that on the issue of women in cooperative movement. But this is a part of this chapter that I still have to write. But this is what I see now. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Did I answer everything? I'm sorry. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I have two questions, if I may. One is, I know very little about your topic, so if it's irrelevant, please ignore. Talking about the interwar period, I'm sure you know the Labour and Socialist International archives are in Amsterdam.
Mm-hmm.
and they're digitally available. So are there your Yugoslav women there somehow also, or they don't participate?
No, they participate to a degree, so you could find them, yeah. But,
I was just curious.
But
and another question. So you were mentioning in the very beginning, you know, how you're looking at it's a methodological question. You're looking at this international organization and then this national contribution, and then in your presentation, you were also talking about this individual women who you think are. So their contribution somehow stands out. So I wonder methodologically, how do you combine these three levels? Like, are you trying to reconstruct some of their biographical details? Like, do you include these individuals as individuals in a way as a third layer? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand your question. I'm just now thinking about it. I know that this is at the moment also a very prominent approach and good one if you want to also grasp all of these long-term things and political ruptures. In my case, I have my own folder with my main activists and all the info that I can gain. However, methodologically, I am still unsure if this will be something that I will claim methodologically, if that makes sense. I think this might turn out into actually saying something more about these women, but I don't think, for example, I will write political biographies of these women.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah, but maybe I will decide to do that. Who knows? Because yeah.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Adela.
So to me it sounded like everyone wanted to change everyone's mind, and I wonder whether they did. So particularly on the issue of social reproduction, to what extent can you see or trace changes in the way they approach this from this collaboration? Let's say just from the English and Yugoslav cooperation exchange. How do you see changes in their ideas about how to approach social reproduction?
I don't think anyone changes anyone's mind, but some moves broaden, how to put it, certain perspectives. And I think when it comes to International Guild, it's shared many of its viewpoints with its social democratic counterparts in connected to political parties and trade unions. However, with the specific issue of social reproduction, interwar period is very interesting in this regard because social democrats didn't agree among themselves how to solve many of these things. So basically, the clash between communists and social democrats on this issue was never only ideological and only that went across the ideological lines, because social democrats, some of them were very much against for example, family allowances, so that women doesn't work, but that she received some money, because of many questions, like who would receive that money, husband, woman, like, and so on. So in the early 1930s, social democratic movement also split on this issue. They could not agree, and you could see from one of the booklets here that the International Guild also ditched the question in the interwar period because they could not agree. Although if you just see this booklet, Mothers of the Future, you would conclude that okay, you have a communist position there for the socialization of social reproduction, and you have social democratic entry that is about, let's make women not work but receiving some monthly allowances. But it would be very simplistic interpretation of that thing, because things were not so simple. I think that in the later period, in a post-war period, discussion, in my opinion, so far was not so heated anymore, I would say. But social democrats and communist-aligned consumer cooperative, women cooperative activists liked to travel to all the Eastern Bloc countries and Yugoslavia to see how to do. But on the other hand, what could they do in their capitalist context was very limited, but they did make pressure on the cooperative movement to engage more with the socialization of all of this, through opening services and through all of this. I will have this in mind to be able to give a to give it. Yeah.
Well, we have one more question from the participant on the Zoom, and I have 2 additional questions, but we'll see if you're too tired, then I can ask you afterwards when we drink coffee. So Jana is saying, thank you for bringing this topic into focus. You've mentioned the UK, but could you give a brief insight into the relationship with Sweden, if any, particularly their social democratic ideas and influence over the Yugoslav? It's a big question, but I wonder if you found any relevant connections. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I expected to find this because Swedish consumer cooperative movement was very strong. And also it worked a lot on the topic of reproductive labor. However, it was not, for some reason, of particular interest for Yugoslav women. I didn't find that. They mentioned, of course, the Swedish movement, but the connections so far, and I think I went through most of the material, I could not establish any closer relationship with Sweden.
Okay. So shall I ask the questions now, or shall we move to coffee?
Coffee.
Yeah? Okay. So, Jelena, but it's really interesting for me. I will ask it anyway.
Okay.
But we can then discuss more over coffee. So I was really interested in whether you have found something about concrete realizations of their efforts, you know, because I was really, it was interesting to me when we found this section that we suppose was created by Mara Rupena Osolnik at the cooperative union. There were, I mean, maybe the documents are missing, but more or less those were the documents, those were the letters to some friends in cooperative women organizations abroad, or preparations for the meetings, stuff like that. It was interesting for me that we didn't find any, you know, real any documents that would talk about some real engagement. What did they succeed in? I mean, did they really have any power? Were they successful in any area? So that was my first question. And the second one, which is really also interesting for me, is that although it is a cooperative guild, I find that there is a real lack of the specific issues that are connected to peasant women, Yugoslav peasant women, or peasant women in general. No, let's say Yugoslav peasant women, because Yugoslavia, of course, had, you were talking about the consumer producer cooperatives and division between those two. But in Slovenia, in Yugoslavia, women were mostly not employed. In other communist or state socialist countries who took care of the collectivization, the women found, peasant women found their first job in agricultural work, so in the cooperatives in large part. but in Yugoslavia, not. In Slovenia, there was the majority of the agricultural assets were private. So those women took over the man's labor when the man took the job in industry, and were faced with so many specific issues. And those are really lacking in those debates. I think it's, and it's also probably connected to I don't know, to some ideological background, because as far as I know, maybe you know more, you know better, but as far as I know, the communist ideology didn't really saw a women issue as something that was separate from the class issue. So when socialism would progress, women issues would be
Resolved.
Yeah, resolved. Thank you. So that's really interesting for me. So there was no one who would be fighting for these specific struggles that peasant women really had. You know, it happened later on in 70s, even more so in 80s, but at that time, not really.
Okay.
It was part of the broader women issue, but it was a cooperative guild still. So it was meant to take care of the peasant women.
Okay, I can start from the last one. So
Okay.
then, I would say that although the kind of main line was that in communism we solved the problems, I think that the existence of both women's organizations and then coming up with a specific section which was supposed to work with and among peasant women actually proved that women in Yugoslavia, which I call women activists, thought of these issues. And it's a matter of sources also when it comes to your first question, like these letters, and it's a matter of scale in this presentation. So in this presentation is focused on international level, and I really could not squeeze in all the problems these women actually faced locally. But when it comes to this, what actually was a great source of information for me was again the fund of Conference for Social Activity of Women, not the cooperative fund in Archives of Slovenia, where in the first couple of boxes, for example, just in the first couple of boxes, I found numerous sources on Slovene women's sections or zveza zadružnic and what kind of activities they were actually carried out on the ground.
But when?
It was early 50s.
Ah, okay.
And
Right.
no, 55, 56, 57,
Alright.
but there are a
Okay.
couple of them too, yeah.
Okay.
And then you see, because they had to also write reports for the federal levels, republic federal levels and so on, you saw that they would list according to Sreda and košare and all of these more local levels, the number of courses in agriculture they actually carried out with women, a number of courses in handicrafts, for example, a number of, this is like from educational perspectives, how they, what kind of issues on hygiene and specific things for the rural areas were there.
Yeah.
And this is something that this is how they envision what these cooperative sections should do locally. When it comes to all of these trying to opening services such as bakeries in the villages, laundries, and who is supposed to be in charge of all of this? Should this be in charge of cooperatives or someone else? I think what they try to do is, the idea from sources I see is to kind of help peasant women to get rid of a certain amount of labor and a certain of double burden that was on her
Yeah.
legs and stuff.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't specific enough. I know, of course, there were efforts to socialize the domestic work, but still, and this was specific for Yugoslav case, women were taking on so much more agricultural work. So, and that was not addressed. Maybe I was not speaking very collected before.
I would say you're right in that regard. That this is kind of a bit of a blind spot when it comes to their activism. What was the second part with the
You bet.
And power
It's okay.
issues, power issues, and everything. I think these all also including the material conditions and these fights that I mentioned, like do we have money? This was also playing out on the local levels too, like who will pay for something. But I think that another important issue that I didn't mention here were actually power relations and who was making decisions and in what ways. And you can see here that basically women were really struggling with convincing comrades that something mattered on one hand, but also with sometimes carrying out some decisions that they did not always participate in making.
Okay. Thank you, Jelena. And thank you all for sticking with us so long. So now let's have a coffee. And for those on Zoom, I'm so sorry.